Imagine flipping on the local news in the middle of summer. You hear about a new nighttime walking ban in a specific neighborhood in Rotterdam.
Right.
And then maybe a 20-euro registration fee being floated for local hobbyist beekeepers.
Which sounds totally mundane.
Exactly. And a few corporate updates about employees acting as military reservists. Boring, right?
That's
You probably just changed the channel.
absolutely.
But I mean, what if I told you that to a specific, highly influential group of broadcasters, those three utterly mundane stories aren't just local administrative clutter?
Yeah, what if they aren't?
Right. What if those stories are framed as the undisputed, terrifying proof of a globally orchestrated dystopian takeover?
It's wild. It completely shatters how we usually consume the news. I mean, instead of seeing random events, the text we are examining today connects those dots into this massive, looming constellation of state control.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a magnifying glass to an incredibly dense, highly controversial stack of sources you've shared with us.
Really dense.
Yeah, we are looking at a transcript from a Dutch broadcast called Café Weltschmerz. Specifically, an episode featuring commentators Willem, Engel, and Jeroen as they sit down to review the events of Week 31 in the year 2026.
But we need to set a firm ground rule before we take a single step further.
Oh, definitely.
This source material contains highly politically charged content. I mean, it touches on incredibly sensitive geopolitical conflicts, highly debated medical rollouts, environmental flashpoints, and intense social issues.
It covers everything.
Right. So our goal today is absolutely not to take a side, to validate or to endorse any of these viewpoints. Rather, we are here to impartially unpack the claims, decode the arguments, and just show you exactly what ideas are being presented in the text you brought to us.
We are acting strictly as your analytical guides through this specific narrative landscape.
Exactly. It just guides.
So let's jump right into that landscape. The hook Engel and Poles use to start their broadcast relies on a brilliant bit of irony.
Yeah, I love this part.
They kick off the show by complaining about komkommertijd.
Komkommertijd.
Right. Which is a fantastic Dutch phrase that literally translates to cucumber time.
Cucumber time.
Yeah, it refers to the slow summer news cycle. You know, the dog days of August when politicians are on recess, the courts are quiet, and even the criminals seem to be on vacation.
So they sort of lower the audience's guard with this idea that absolutely nothing of consequence is happening.
Exactly.
And by establishing that premise of quiet boredom, the whiplash of their actual analysis hits so much harder. I mean, they take the seemingly innocent cucumber time news and immediately recontextualize it as the state quietly moving its chess pieces while the public is asleep.
Which brings us to the first piece on their board. A new corporate covenant signed by 57 Dutch organizations and companies.
Right.
This agreement allows employees to work as military reservists during their regular clocked-in work hours. Now, if you read a standard corporate press release, this sounds like a civic duty initiative, right?
Sure. Companies supporting the national defense, employees getting some specialized training.
Yeah, but the broadcasters reject that corporate gloss entirely.
Oh, they throw it right out.
They view this integration of the military into the civilian workday as overt war propaganda.
Right. The logic here dictates that the state knows a draft would be wildly unpopular, so they are slowly, methodically militarizing the corporate workforce.
Like creeping in.
Yeah, Engel and Poles argued this is designed to psychologically condition the Dutch public, softening them up for an inevitable, fully orchestrated ground conflict with Russia. They see it as normalizing the uniform in the office break room.
They even joke about the absurdity of someone using "I'm a reservist" as a pickup line at a bar, just to highlight how artificially this military identity is being injected into daily civilian life.
A striking image.
But if conditioning the workforce isn't enough, Café Weltschmerz then looks at how this state is conditioning physical movement. They pivot to a very specific, hyper-local story out of Rotterdam, specifically the Eswick neighborhood.
Yeah, the area ban.
Right. The municipality there implemented what they call an area ban restricting public movement at night for anyone who doesn't have a good reason to be outside.
And to understand why Engel and Poles are so alarmed by this, you really have to look at the mechanics of Dutch law.
Okay, unpack that.
Traditionally, a gebiedsverbod, an area ban, is a highly specific punitive measure. It is applied to an individual.
Like just one person.
Right. Say someone commits multiple offenses in a specific shopping district, a judge can ban that specific person from that specific area.
That makes sense.
But what Rotterdam has done, according to the broadcast, is invert the mechanism. They took an individual punishment and blanketed an entire geographic population with it.
Wow.
Yeah, reversing the burden of proof so that every citizen is treated as a potential criminal unless they can justify their presence on a public sidewalk.
It's like setting up a VIP rope,
Yeah.
but for a public street.
Yes.
And the bouncer is the state demanding you prove you have the right to walk to the corner store.
Exactly. And the broadcast immediately compares this to the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Of course they do.
They argue that Rotterdam is being used as a laboratory. If the public passively accepts this localized curfew, well, the state establishes the legal precedent to scale it up nationwide whenever they see fit.
The creep of bureaucracy into every facet of life is the core theme here. And nothing illustrates that better than their next target, which moves from the military to the streets and finally into the literal backyards of citizens.
The bees. We have to talk about the bees.
We really do. The source highlights a new regulation slated for January 1st, 2025. This rule requires hobbyist beekeepers to formally register their hives with the government and pay a registration fee of roughly 18 to 20 euros.
Right.
The stated reason on the paperwork is to prevent animal diseases. Now, looking at this objectively, you might think, okay, the government just wants to track agriculture for tax purposes or genuinely wants to monitor for things like colony collapse disorder.
Sure, sounds reasonable on the surface. But in the narrative architecture of Café Weltschmerz, the phrase prevent animal diseases is an immediate red flag.
A huge red flag.
They view this registry not as an administrative tax grab, but as a deliberate, calculated attack on independent food production.
But wait, how does an 18 euro fee destroy food production, though? I mean, 20 bucks is 20 bucks.
Right, but it's not the fee, it's the map.
The map.
Yeah, the broadcasters draw a direct parallel to past events in Australia, citing incidents where authorities massively culled healthy bee populations under the guise of halting the spread of the varroa mite.
Oh, I see.
The argument Engel and Pols are building rests on the idea that the state fears self-sufficiency. By forcing beekeepers to register, the Dutch government is essentially demanding that citizens hand over a detailed map of all independent, decentralized food pollination nodes.
Wow. Got it.
And once the state has the map, the broadcast suggests, a future mass culling becomes terrifyingly simple to execute the moment a quote-unquote disease is announced.
So the three line is complete. Whether they are drafting your office worker into camouflage, putting a checkpoint on your neighborhood sidewalk, or geolocating your backyard beehive, the broadcasters are trying to show their audience that the state is weaving a net to eliminate freedom of movement and physical autonomy.
That's exactly how they frame it.
But if we follow their thread on tracking physical space, the broadcast takes an even sharper turn when it looks at how the state defines what goes inside the body.
Yes, we are moving from physical geography to the landscape of medical and legal definitions. And the text spends an enormous amount of time intensely focused on the legal classification of the mRNA COVID-19 injections.
Broadcasters outright refuse to use the word vaccine.
Right, they will not say it.
They stubbornly and consistently refer to the mRNA shots as gene therapy. And they go to extraordinary lengths to prove they aren't just using inflammatory rhetoric, but are actually legally correct.
They really dig into the paperwork.
Yeah, they start by pulling up SEC filings. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, an SEC filing, specifically something like a Form 10-K, is a comprehensive report filed annually by publicly traded companies to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission.
It's the real deal.
It requires companies to be brutally honest with their investors about the risks their business faces.
And the mechanism of an SEC filing is vital here. If a company lies or omits a known risk in these documents, they can be sued into oblivion by their shareholders.
Exactly.
So Café Weltschmerz points out that in the SEC filings from companies like Moderna and BioNTech, these pharmaceutical giants allegedly state that the FDA and other regulatory bodies consider mRNA technology to be classified as gene therapy.
The broadcasters use this as their foundational proof.
Yeah.
They are basically saying, look, when the pharmaceutical companies talk to the public, they say vaccine. But when they talk to their investors under threat of perjury, they admit it's gene therapy.
It's a powerful rhetorical tool.
But they don't stop at the SEC. They claim to have found an absolute smoking gun within the European regulatory framework.
Right. They point to the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, and specifically to a document within the European Pharmacopoeia.
The Pharmacopoeia.
Yeah. To understand why this matters, you have to know that the Pharmacopoeia is essentially the master recipe book and legal dictionary for all pharmaceutical products in Europe. If a product doesn't fit the definition in that book, it cannot be legally sold or administered under that category.
So it's the ultimate authority.
Exactly. And Engel and Poles claim that in April 2024, the European Pharmacopoeia quietly, officially updated the definition of what constitutes a vaccine.
Oh, really?
According to the text, the new definition explicitly added nucleic acids, meaning DNA and RNA, that code for antigens.
Let's just break down that biology jargon for a second. An antigen is the foreign substance that triggers your immune system, like the spike protein of a virus. Traditional vaccines introduce a weakened piece of that antigen directly.
Right.
The mRNA shots introduce the genetic code, the nucleic acid instructions, and force your own cells to manufacture the antigen.
Exactly. And the broadcasters fixate on that April 2024 date.
Why that date specifically?
Because if the official definition of a vaccine had to be legally rewritten in 2024 to include nucleic acids that code for antigens, well, the logic here dictates that prior to 2024, mRNA did not legally qualify as a vaccine.
Okay, let me pause and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Let's assume the definition change did happen exactly as they describe in April 2024. Couldn't one simply argue that science just outpaced the dictionary?
That's a very common counter-argument.
I mean, we invented a wildly new, unprecedented technology in 2020. The regulatory bodies spent a few years catching up to the reality of the science and eventually updated the legal text to reflect how modern medicine works. Why does Café Weltschmerz view a bureaucratic update as inherently malicious?
Because to Engel and Poles, the distinction between vaccine and gene therapy is the entire ballgame.
It's that important to them.
Oh, absolutely. Traditional vaccines have decades of established public trust and incredibly streamlined regulatory pathways for emergency authorization.
Right, we're used to them.
Gene therapies, historically, face massive public skepticism, intense ethical debates, and notoriously grueling multi-year regulatory safety hurdles.
I see.
The broadcasters assert that the term vaccine was deliberately used as a psychological and legal Trojan horse. They argue the rollouts in 2020 and 2021 were fundamentally illegal because they sidestepped the gene therapy regulations by mislabeling the product.
Wow.
And that the 2024 definition change is simply the cartel trying to retroactively cover their legal tracks.
The determination to prove this legal misclassification leads to one of the most surreal, fascinating moments in the entire text. Jeroen Poles literally describes getting into an argument with an artificial intelligence over this exact issue.
The Grok AI anecdote, it perfectly encapsulates their methodology.
Yes. Poles describes logging into X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and interacting with Grok, the AI developed by Elon Musk's XAI. Now, Grok is often marketed as being anti-woke, or having fewer restrictions than ChatGPT, but Poles claims even Grok had rigid narrative guardrails programmed into it.
He was not happy about that.
No, not at all. When he first asked Grok if the mRNA shots were gene therapy, the AI firmly insisted they were vaccines. But Poles didn't accept that. He says he essentially cross-examined the machine.
Cross-examine an AI.
Literally. He forced the AI through 20 successive, highly specific prompts. He fed the AI the older European legal monographs. He fed it the pre-2024 definitions. He walked the machine step by step through the logic until finally the AI's algorithm broke under the weight of its own legal programming.
By his account, he corners the AI into admitting that, based strictly on the pre-2024 legal frameworks he provided, the mRNA shots could not be legally defined as vaccines and therefore defaulted to the classification of gene therapy.
It is such a vivid picture. I mean, a broadcaster sitting at his keyboard, acting like a prosecuting attorney, interrogating a piece of code until he gets a confession.
It really is.
And that prosecutorial mindset transitions perfectly into how they view accountability, because proving the response was illegal is only step one. Step two is punishing the architects.
This brings us to their retrospective on the COVID-19 pandemic and the concept of what they view as a geopolitical health cartel.
Right.
The broadcast zeroes in on a recent, highly publicized United States congressional hearing involving Dr. Anthony Fauci.
They are absolutely merciless in their review of this hearing. They highlight the fact that Dr. Fauci pled the Fifth Amendment, invoking his constitutional right to remain silent to avoid self-incrimination 111 times during the proceedings.
111 times.
Yeah, and the broadcasters find incredible, bitter irony in this. They bring up Fauci's famous statement from years prior where he essentially said, "Attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science."
I remember that.
Engel and Poles mock this relentlessly. Their takeaway is, well, now science is pleading the Fifth.
It's vital to look at how they frame that hearing, though. In a highly polarized political landscape, you might expect a broadcast that is deeply skeptical of the pandemic response to cheer when Fauci is grilled by conservative politicians.
You would think so, right?
But they don't. They dismiss the entire hearing as a piece of political theater. They call it a crumb thrown to the critics, a fake cathartic spectacle designed to make the public feel like justice is being served, while the actual underlying system remains completely untouched.
And this is where their worldview completely breaks the traditional left-right political paradigm. You might assume, based on their anti-establishment, anti-mandate stance, that they would champion someone like Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely not.
They tear into him just as ruthlessly. They heavily criticize Trump's Operation Warp Speed, the program that accelerated the development of the mRNA shots. The broadcasters make an incredibly stark claim, stating that Warp Speed cost 10 million lives globally.
They systematically dismantle the popular alternative narrative that Trump was secretly working on behalf of the public, the idea that he was playing 5D chess against the deep state.
Right, that's a huge talking point in some circles.
One of the broadcasters delivers a devastating line to that exact crowd. He says he is playing 5D chess, but he's playing it against the population.
It's a total rejection of the political spectrum. They don't see Democrats or Republicans, they see a unified cartel. And they trace the roots of this cartel back way before the virus ever made headlines.
All the way back to 2016.
Yeah, they dive into claims surrounding patents
Yeah.
and DARPA, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. According to the text, the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, and DARPA were actively funding patent research for Moderna as early as 2016, specifically involving a controversial scientist named Ralph Baric, who is well known for his work on coronaviruses.
By establishing this 2016 timeline, Cafe Weltschmerz is telling its audience that the global pandemic response was not a chaotic, panicked reaction to an unforeseen novel virus.
There wasn't an accident.
No, in their narrative, the mRNA technology, the patents, and the regulatory capture were all pre-planned. The pandemic merely provided the required state of emergency to deploy a monopolistic wealth transfer mechanism disguised as public health.
To really hammer home this idea that citizens are viewed as nothing more than experimental test subjects by the state, they draw a historical parallel that stretches back 30 years. They bring up Gulf War syndrome.
This was a really intense part of the broadcast.
The broadcast cites claims pointing to declassified documents and historical accounts, suggesting that military personnel deployed in the 1990s were systematically used as guinea pigs for experimental squalene adjuvanted anthrax vaccines.
And the text asserts that this unchecked medical experimentation resulted in a 30% rate of severe chronic side effects among those soldiers.
30%, that's massive.
It is. By drawing a direct historical line from the Gulf War veterans to the COVID-19 rollout, Engel and Poles are establishing a pattern of behavior. They are arguing that the state's willingness to sacrifice the physical autonomy of its citizens isn't new, the scale just got bigger.
So we have thoroughly mapped out how this source views medical science as a cartel. But they don't stop there.
Not at all.
They take that exact same framework of skepticism and apply it to environmental science. If the public health crisis was manufactured, the logic here dictates that the climate crisis must be manufactured too.
And they attack the climate narrative by going after its most foundational, unshakable premise, the concept of scarcity.
Right.
The entire green agenda is built on the idea that Earth's resources are finite, fragile, and rapidly depleting. Cafe Weltschmerz attempts to shatter that premise entirely.
They start with water. They cite a genuine, fascinating scientific discovery regarding the Earth's mantle. Geologists have found evidence of a massive subterranean layer of ringwoodite, a sponge-like crystal structure located about 650 kilometers underground.
It's an incredible discovery.
Because of the extreme pressure and temperature, this rock traps water molecules within its mineral structure. Scientists estimate this subterranean transition zone holds more water than all of the surface oceans on Earth combined.
Now, mainstream science views this as a marvel of planetary geology that explains the deep water cycle. But Engel and Poles weaponize this data. They argue that if the Earth is essentially sitting on an unimaginably vast, self-replenishing subterranean ocean, then the entire concept of a global water scarcity crisis is a complete fabricated myth designed to exert control over agriculture and human consumption.
And they take that exact same logic that the Earth is a self-refilling water balloon and apply it to fossil fuels. The broadcast heavily promotes the abiotic oil theory.
This is a crucial concept to unpack. The universally accepted scientific consensus is that fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, are formed from the compressed, heated remains of ancient organic matter, like algae and zooplankton, over millions of years.
Right, which is why we call them fossil fuels.
Precisely. Because the biological material is finite, the fuel is finite.
Yeah.
But the abiotic oil theory, which has roots in Soviet-era geology and fringe astrophysics, posits something entirely different.
Okay, what does it claim?
It argues that hydrocarbons like methane and crude oil are not biological in origin at all. Instead, it suggests they are naturally, continuously, and infinitely synthesized deep within the Earth's mantle by purely chemical processes, and then slowly seep up toward the crust.
So if oil is abiotic, if it's just a natural chemical byproduct of the Earth's core that constantly replenishes itself like sweat on skin, then we can never actually run out.
That's their argument.
And if we can never run out, the broadcasters argue that the entire panic over peak oil and the desperate trillion-dollar push for green energy transitions are based on a monumental lie.
It completely deconstructs the moral imperative of the environmental movement, but it raises a massive logical problem.
Right, me too.
Even if you argue that resources are infinite, you still have to explain the very visible, undeniable environmental disasters happening right now. You can't deny that the planet is physically burning.
Exactly. And this is where the transcript gets incredibly dark and, quite frankly, bizarre.
Yeah.
I have to stop the show for a second, because when they address the massive wildfires raging across France, Spain, and Greece, their explanation is jarring.
It really is.
They don't blame droughts, they don't blame record-breaking heat waves, and they certainly don't blame climate change. They claim these fires are acts of coordinated, deliberate terrorism. And the specific detail they cite is dead cats.
Yes, the broadcast claims that in places like Italy, there have been instances where dead animals, specifically cats, were found with fuel-soaked rags tied to their tails.
Oh my God.
The claim is that climate fanatics, or covert eco-terrorists, are literally setting these animals on fire, causing the panicked, burning cats to flee deep into the dry brush, intentionally igniting massive, uncontrollable forest fires.
Wait, hold on. Dead cats with fuel rags. Are they citing a verifiable police report for this, or is this an urban legend they've absorbed? I mean, how does someone introduce animal torture into a broadcast about global climate policy?
It's definitely shocking.
It's such a macabre, shocking image.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at how they use it, it serves a very specific narrative purpose. Instead of the massive wildfires proving that climate change is real and accelerating, the fires in their worldview prove that a shadow network is deliberately destroying the environment to simulate climate change.
It's the ultimate inversion of reality. The crisis isn't the climate. The crisis is the people pretending the climate is failing. And they argue the state is completely complicit in this simulation, even going so far as to sabotage its own ability to fight the fires.
They highlight a situation in Spain to prove this. They claim that the Spanish government is currently unable to effectively battle these massive blazes because their most highly effective specialized firefighting helicopters are entirely grounded.
Grounded why?
Because they are Russian Kamov K-32 helicopters, and they cannot be serviced or flown due to the strict European sanctions placed on Russia.
To Engel and Poles, this is the ultimate proof of the establishment's hypocrisy. If the climate crisis were truly an existential threat to humanity, as governments claim, they would waive the sanctions to save the burning forests.
Right. You'd prioritize the existential threat.
Exactly. The fact that geopolitical posturing and sanctions take precedence over putting out the fires proves to the broadcasters that the environment is merely a pawn on a much larger chessboard.
But this brings up a massive question. If the Earth has infinite water and infinite oil, and the environmental disasters are just staged terrorism, what is the actual point? Why go through the unimaginable effort of faking a global climate crisis? What is the end goal?
The broadcasters answer that question unequivocally as we move into their analysis of the economy. The end goal is the total monopolization of energy and the deliberate, calculated economic squeeze of middle class.
The middle class always gets squeezed.
Always. They believe the green agenda is nothing more than a manufactured justification to impose crippling taxes, enforce new regulations, and consolidate power into the hands of a few multinational corporations while destroying independent businesses.
They start illustrating this squeeze by looking right in their own backyard at the Dutch gas reserves. The source issues a stark warning, noting that the national gas reserves will be completely empty in just 96 days as they head into the winter months.
96 days is nothing.
It's really close. But the tragedy, according to Café Weltschmerz, is that the Netherlands sits on top of the massive Slochteren gas field in Groningen. The government shut down extraction there due to induced earthquakes that were damaging homes.
Now, mainstream politics views the closing of the Groningen field as a difficult but necessary decision to protect local citizens from seismic damage. But Engel and Poles view it as intentional economic self-sabotage.
Of course.
They cite a financial commentator named Ernst Wolf who predicts a massive, catastrophic energy crisis come September-October when these strategic reserves finally run dry.
But here is the critical twist. They don't view this impending winter crisis as a failure of government planning. They view it as a deliberate feature of the system. To explain how this system operates globally, they quote the American conservative commentator Tucker Carlson.
Right, the Tucker Carlson segment.
The broadcast theorizes that the global oil and energy markets are no longer driven by traditional supply and demand. Instead, they claim the entire market is being entirely manipulated by advanced AI and high-frequency trading algorithms.
The theory they build here is insidious. They argue these algorithms are designed to create artificial, rapidly oscillating boom and bust cycles.
How does that work?
Well, the AI will engineer a week of promising fake peace talks in a conflict zone, causing the global price of oil to suddenly drop. Institutions buy up the cheap oil. Then, the algorithm factors in a sudden, seemingly random bombing or geopolitical escalation, causing panic and spiking the price of oil back up, allowing those institutions to sell at a massive profit.
So the geopolitical chaos isn't random. Chaos is the literal business model. War and peace are just levers being pulled by an algorithm to maximize profit while slowly draining the strategic reserves of sovereign nations.
It's all just a machine.
And they see this exact same economic warfare happening on the industrial level, specifically targeting the transportation sector. The broadcast spends significant time analyzing the transition from the Euro 6 to the Euro 7 vehicle emission standards in the European Union.
To grasp why they care about this, you have to look at what Euro 7 actually changes. Previous emission standards almost exclusively measured the exhaust coming out of the tailpipe, but Euro 7 introduces the measurement of particulate matter from non-exhaust sources.
Non-exhaust, like what?
Specifically, the microscopic dust generated by brake pad wear and tire degradation.
How do you even practically regulate brake dust on a massive commercial trucking fleet?
The logistics are mind-boggling.
And that is exactly the point Café Weltschmerz makes.
The source frames the Euro 7 standards as an impossible, constantly shifting finish line. They argue it is a deliberate regulatory plot designed to bankrupt independent transport and logistics companies.
Because they can't afford the upgrades.
Right. By making traditional combustion engine transport legally impossible to maintain, the state forces everyone to adopt electric trucks, which the broadcasters claim are commercially unviable, vastly more expensive, and prone to failure.
It is a mechanism of what they term deindustrialization.
Mm-hmm.
The goal isn't clean air. The goal is wiping out the independent trucker so that only massive state-subsidized corporate fleets can survive.
Mm-hmm.
And they point to the collapse of legacy European industries as proof that this deindustrialization is actively working.
They bring up the bankruptcy of Varda. For context, Varda is a legendary 138-year-old German battery manufacturing company. It survived 2 world wars, but it recently filed for restructuring. In the narrative of Café Weltschmerz, the collapse of such a foundational European industrial pillar isn't just a case of bad business management or stiff competition from Asian markets. It is the intentional hollowing out of European industrial sovereignty.
They argue that Europe is being intentionally stripped of its ability to produce its own energy and its own technology. The state wants the populace entirely dependent on imported, tightly controlled resources.
They even make a dark joke about it.
Yeah, about how the government's aggressive push for residential solar panels and cheap home battery walls is just leading to a statistical increase in residential meter box fires. They view the entire green transition as highly flammable, both literally and economically.
It is a profoundly bleak view of the domestic economy. But Engel and Poles argue that the economic squeeze at home is perfectly mirrored by the chaos being orchestrated abroad. The text moves from the economy into a deep analysis of geopolitics, painting a picture of a world where the concept of sovereign nations and international law no longer exists.
The broadcast starts this geopolitical analysis with a rather startling, highly specific claim about the war in Ukraine. They assert that Ukrainian intelligence cells have been actively conducting covert attacks in the Middle East, Specifically, they claim Ukrainian operatives have been active in Iraq and have even attacked an Iranian ship operating in the Caspian Sea.
Caspian Sea.
Wait, the Caspian Sea. The landlocked body of water bordered by Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. Ukraine doesn't even share a border with the Caspian Sea. The logistical complexity of Ukraine executing a naval strike in a closed foreign sea while fighting an existential land war at home is staggering.
Which is precisely why Engel and Poles highlight it. They use this alleged Caspian Sea strike to fundamentally redefine the nature of the Ukrainian conflict.
How do they redefine it?
Mainstream international consensus views Ukraine as an independent, sovereign actor fighting a desperate defensive war against a Russian invasion. Café Weltschmerz rejects that completely.
They frame Ukraine as nothing more than a forward operating base. They argue that Ukraine is acting as a proxy for Western intelligence and Israeli geopolitical interests, deliberately exporting terrorism and sabotage into the Middle East to intentionally expand a regional dispute into a global conflict.
It's a complete erasure of sovereignty.
I really have to push back on their framing here. By painting Ukraine purely as a puppet that solely acts out the desires of Washington or Tel Aviv, doesn't that perspective completely erase any local agency?
Oh, totally.
I mean, it ignores the historical context of the post-Soviet collapse, the regional complexities of Eastern Europe, and the actual booth-on-the-ground reality of millions of Ukrainians fighting for their homes. It reduces a massive bleeding land war to a simple, clean conspiracy of puppet masters pulling strings.
It absolutely reduces it, but that reduction is structurally essential to their overarching narrative architecture. If you concede that Ukraine has independent agency, the conspiracy falls apart.
That makes sense.
In the worldview of Engel and Poles, there are absolutely no independent geopolitical actors left on the global stage. There are only proxies managed by a centralized, malignant elite. And they believe this elite is currently in the process of loudly and publicly dismantling the rules-based international order.
And nowhere is that dismantling more obvious to them than at the International Criminal Court, the ICC in The Hague. The broadcast outlines what they see as the orchestrated, systematic unraveling of the court's legitimacy.
They list a rapid-fire sequence of events to prove this unraveling. First, they point to Venezuela officially pulling out of the ICC jurisdiction, with Venezuelan leadership citing political attacks and bias from the court.
Okay.
Second, they highlight the actions of U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, who they claim is leading an aggressive legislative campaign to effectively dismantle or defund the ICC to protect Israeli leadership from potential prosecution.
Right.
Third, they point to the intense political pressure and calls for the removal of ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan after he formally sought arrest warrants for high-ranking Israeli officials.
To the broadcasters, this sequence of events is irrefutable proof that international law is a complete facade. It's a set of rules applied only to the enemies of the West. But the absolute second the court attempts to apply those same rules to Western allies or Israeli interests, the entire apparatus is threatened with destruction.
This leads the broadcast into one of the most historically sensitive and highly charged segments of their geopolitical review. They bring up a recent controversy involving Frans Timmermans, a highly prominent Dutch politician and former first vice president of the European Commission.
The text notes that Timmermans apparently made a speech where he compared Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, specifically the clearing of land for new settlements, to the Nazi concept of Lebensraum, or the aggressive expansion of territory for living space. Now, using World War II terminology to describe the actions of the Jewish state is an absolute political third rail.
It usually results in immediate political exile, but Engel and Poles firmly and vocally defend Timmermans' use of the comparison.
Really?
Yeah. The broadcast argues that the accusation of anti-Semitism has been entirely weaponized. They claim it is no longer a term used to describe actual prejudice against Jewish people, but is instead deployed purely as a rhetorical kill switch to immediately shut down any legitimate political debate and deflect all criticism of Israeli state policy.
They view the territorial expansionism as an undeniable physical reality. The broadcast even cites an incredibly specific detail, pointing out that massive real estate billboards have been popping up in Cyprus.
Cyprus, yeah.
These billboards are reportedly advertising newly acquired Cypriot property in Hebrew. To Café Weltschmerz, this isn't just an international real estate venture. It is the visible, undeniable proof of an encroaching Greater Israel agenda that operates completely outside the boundaries of international law, protected by the very elites who are dismantling the ICC.
So, if we take a breath and zoom out to look at the entire picture they've painted so far, The medical establishment is a pharmaceutical cartel masking gene therapy. The environmental movement is a terrorist front simulating a crisis. The global economy is an algorithmic squeeze designed to bankrupt the working class, and international law is dead, replaced by proxy wars and expansionism.
It is an incredibly heavy, suffocating worldview.
It's overwhelming. But just when you think the text can't get any broader, the broadcasters actually pull all of these massive global themes back down to the cultural and individual level. Because if the state is manipulating the globe, they also have to manipulate the minds of the people living on it. We are looking now at their views on cultural social engineering.
They believe the public is being actively shaped by psychological pressures, and they take direct aim at modern cultural movements, specifically focusing their intense criticism on pride events.
Yes, they highlight two seemingly disconnected examples. First, they mention the Artist Zoo in Amsterdam, which apparently participated in a local Pride Week by creating exhibits or highlighting instances of homosexual behavior in the animal kingdom.
Okay, the zoo.
Second, they bring up a controversy from the United States regarding the marketing of transgender dolls with removable or interchangeable parts that were reportedly marketed to children as young as 4 years old.
Now, a standard societal view might frame these events as clumsy but well-intentioned efforts at inclusivity, civil rights, or emancipation. The broadcast completely rejects that.
They do. Engel and Pauls frame these cultural events not as grassroots movements, but as a top-down, deliberate psychological operation, a psyop.
They use a very specific, highly clinical phrase. They call it the normalization of psychiatric behavior. They argue that the elite are intentionally pushing these highly provocative, deeply polarizing cultural flashpoints into the mainstream, and specifically targeting children to intentionally confuse and destabilize societal norms.
It's a distraction technique in their eyes.
Right. The logic here dictates that if the public is constantly enraged and fighting a vicious culture war over transgender dolls and zoo exhibits, they will never unite to fight the actual class war against the cartel that is stealing their resources.
It's the ultimate weapon of mass distraction. But amidst their rant on this culture war, the broadcast drops a massive, almost throwaway financial claim that completely reframes how they view the tech industry that facilitates this culture war.
Oh, the AI debt bubble?
Yes, they assert that the giant tech companies, the Googles, the Metas, the Microsofts, are currently hiding $1.65 trillion in AI debt.
$1.65 trillion. They casually compare the entire artificial intelligence industry to Enron. And for those who don't remember the early 2000s, Enron was a massive American energy company that spectacularly collapsed overnight due to massive systemic accounting fraud.
It was a disaster.
It was. Enron used a trick called mark-to-market accounting, where they would build a power plant, project how much money that plant might make over the next 20 years, and then immediately write those future hypothetical profits on their balance sheet today to make the company look insanely profitable.
And Cafe Welchmers is claiming that Silicon Valley is doing the exact same thing with AI.
With AI.
Building and running the massive server farms required for artificial intelligence requires astronomical amounts of electricity and capital. The broadcast theorizes that these tech giants are essentially activating future non-existent AI profits on their balance sheets today to cover the massive bleeding costs of the current AI arms race.
It's a fascinating juxtaposition in their logic. On one hand, earlier in the broadcast, they expressed deep fear of AI algorithms being powerful enough to manipulate the global oil market and corner broadcasters into legal debates.
Right, Grok.
But on the other hand, they believe the entire underlying business model of the AI industry is a hollow, fraudulent financial bubble waiting to burst.
And that concept of a bursting bubble is absolutely crucial because it reveals that they don't believe the cartel is invincible. A burst bubble means the system is fragile. Which brings us to the final and surprisingly optimistic turn in the source material.
Yeah, finally some optimism.
After an hour of outlining a dystopian nightmare, they highlight what they see as beacons of hope, mass non-compliance.
They look for proof that the machine can be broken. They point to a specific situation in Mexico. According to the broadcast, the Mexican government attempted to institute a sweeping national mandate requiring all citizens to register their highly sensitive biometric data, fingerprints, facial scans, and link it directly to their mobile phones' SIM cards.
It's the ultimate surveillance state dream. But the text claims that millions of Mexican citizens simply point-blank refused to comply. The resistance was so widespread, so massive, and so stubborn that the administrative system literally could not process the penalties. The government, faced with the prospect of disconnecting millions of its own citizens from the cellular network and tanking the economy, was forced to completely back down and scrap the mandate.
It's the power of the word no. And they highlight a domestic Dutch example of this exact same friction, the highly infamous Toeslik affair, or the child care benefits scandal.
For those outside the Netherlands, this was a massive scandal where the Dutch tax authority utilized a flawed, biased algorithm to falsely accuse thousands of innocent parents of severe fraud regarding their child care subsidies.
It was awful.
The state aggressively clawed back the money, driving families into profound financial ruin, bankruptcy, and devastating psychological distress.
The broadcast notes a recent development in the fallout of this scandal. They point out that local lower courts in the Netherlands are finally starting to actively rebel against the highest administrative court, the Radvan state.
That's huge.
These lower court judges are actually issuing fines against the state itself for its horrific handling of this scandal and its refusal to properly compensate the victims. To Engel and Pols, this judicial rebellion is undeniable proof that the gears of the seemingly invincible machine can, in fact, be jammed from the inside.
And that brings us to the ultimate distilled thesis of this entire text. What does this all mean? Amidst the terrifying warnings of 96 days of Das left, the accusations of World War III proxy conflicts, the legal arguments over gene therapy, and the fears of an algorithmic squeeze, the broadcast ends on a profoundly optimistic note about human defiance.
The message is incredibly simple. Don't comply. Engel and Pols firmly believe that the massive, terrifying technocratic system they've spent the broadcast describing is, in reality, incredibly weak.
It's a house of cards.
They argue that this cartel relies entirely on the illusion of absolute authority and the passive, unthinking consent of the governed. The moment the masses simply fold their arms and refuse to participate, whether that means refusing biometric tracking, rejecting cultural reengineering, or ignoring legal overreach, the entire apparatus loses its power and collapses under its own weight.
Wow. We have covered a truly staggering amount of ground today. We have taken a wild, intense journey through the narrative architecture of this Café Weltschmerz broadcast.
We really did.
We started with the mundane details of local Dutch beekeeper registrations and nighttime walking bans in Rotterdam, and we watched how the text spiraled those details into claims of email definition cover-ups and AI arguments over gene therapy. We waded through the heavy waters of their COVID-19 retrospective, their brutal critique of Fauci and Trump, and their historical parallels to Gulf War syndrome.
We unpacked the science of subterranean oceans and abiotic oil theory, and we analyzed how they used the bizarre, macabre idea of climate terrorists setting cats on fire to completely invert the environmental narrative.
That was intense.
We traced how they connect all these disparate ideas to a broader theory of algorithmic energy manipulation, the intentional deindustrialization of Europe, the geopolitical proxy wars in the Middle East, the death of international law at the ICC, and a cultural war they view as nothing more than a deliberate psychological operation designed to distract you.
I want to reiterate, as we close this deep dive, the fundamental rule we established at the top of the show. This entire conversation was an exercise in understanding the text itself. We were looking at the internal logic and how this specific broadcast constructs its worldview.
Absolutely.
We are absolutely not endorsing or validating the political, medical, or conspiratorial claims discussed today. Our goal was simply to show you exactly how the pieces fit together in the complex source material you provided.
And as we step back from that material, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. Let's return to that massive $1.65 trillion AI debt bubble the broadcast theorized about. We spend so much time worrying about what AI will do to us. But if that Enron-style tech bubble really does exist, and if the entire financial foundation of artificial intelligence suddenly bursts, what happens to the internet?
Yeah, what happened?
How will the collapse of those algorithms completely reshape the very platforms and social media networks that currently amplify and feed us these highly polarized alternative narratives?
If the algorithm goes bankrupt and breaks, what happens to the echo chamber? That is a fascinating, terrifying question to chew on.
Thank you so much for bringing such a dense, challenging, and deeply thought-provoking stack of sources to the table today. It forced us to look at the news cycle from a completely different, wild perspective. Keep digging, keep reading, and as always, keep questioning everything. See you next time on The Deep Dive.